Hi, this is Orion, and you're listening to Orion's Bedtime Stories podcast. While I have a number of short stories and fairy tales here, for the next little while, I'll be sharing a large chapter book with you, Illusion by Paula Volsky. For 200 years, the exalted classes have ruled over Vonar by virtue of their dazzling magical abilities. Now, their powers grown slack from disuse, they concentrate on the pleasures their station affords them, ignoring the misery of the lower classes. It is only when the red tide of revolution sweeps aside all distinctions of rank, home, and family that the exalted realize the gravity of their mistake. Thrust into the very center of the conflict is the beautiful Elise Faux de Rival, spirited daughter of a provincial landowner. Now, like those she disdained, she must scramble for bread in the teeming streets of the capital city, the key to her abilities an elusive secret, and find a way to survive in a world gone mad with liberty.
Stand. Walk away from me. Turn and come back slowly. No, leave the pastries where they are. And do not walk too swiftly. I wish to observe you at leisure. Zeralyn Rouvignac's manner inspired instant obedience. Yes, grandmother. Setting her plate aside, Elise dutifully rose. Down the length of the private sitting room she paced with all the grace she could muster, spun with a practiced swirl of gauzy skirts, and returned. As she walked, she covertly studied the grandmother who openly studied her. Zeralyn must have been in her mid-70s at least, but somehow she had cheated time. At even a slight distance, her face appeared almost unlined, and a beautiful face it still was, with its intact oval shape, classically regular features, and long hazel eyes. The beauty was somewhat diminished, in Elise's opinion, by an unnecessary layer of paint and a sprinkling of heart-shaped black taffeta patches. Zeralyn's hair, heavy with pomade and gray powder, towered in the old massive style. If she felt its weight, she showed no sign, but she sat fiercely upright in her great armchair, spine never touching the cushions. Perhaps early training accounted in part for the perfection of her posture, and certainly her underwear had something to do with it, for she was encased from breast to hip in an old-fashioned, rigidly boned corset. Obsolescence notwithstanding, the style suited her. Her waist was still small, and the flesh that swelled above the low, square-cut neck of the archaic, panniered gown was white and smooth as a girl's. Age betrayed itself, however, in her hands, which were veined and lightly spotted, despite recourse to countless creams and lemon-scented rinses. In one of them she clasped a carved, beribboned ivory stick. Zeralyn's personality impressed itself upon her surroundings. Elise had noted the combination of traditional elegance, luxury, and originality the moment she walked into the house. She had felt her grandmother's presence in the formal yet comfortable bedchamber to which she and Kerth had been escorted upon arrival, and again in the dining room, where she had shared the table with a band of visiting kinsmen, including a number of interchangeably boisterous children. Zeralyn Rouvignac'h herself, however, did not appear. It was not until the meal was concluded that Elise had received a note summoning her to her mistress's suite. There she had finally encountered her fabled grandmother, and found herself subjected to the most rigorous inspection of her life. "Curtsy," Zeralyn commanded. "Again, and lower. Raise and spread your fan. Now, snap it shut with an air of finality. There, that will suffice. You may resume your seat." Elise complied. Zeralyn eyed her granddaughter in a speculative silence for a time. Elise grew uneasy and resentful under the prolonged scrutiny. She could feel the angry color mounting to her cheeks. Etiquette precluded verbal complaint, but there were other ways to make her displeasure known. Lifting her chin, she returned her grandmother's regard with a cool composure verging upon insolence. It was a trick she had picked up from Stelly Zeno's girl, an acknowledged expert. Noting the expression, Zerilyn smiled, somehow contriving to bend her lips without crinkling the skin around her eyes, which had remained almost unlined. "Good," she decided. "You've a dash of impudence, some hint of spirit. You are nothing like your mother, for which we must be thankful. There is much of your father in you, but that cannot be helped. Perhaps, if we are fortunate, the resemblance is purely superficial. In certain gestures and attitudes, I see something of myself as I was, a most promising sign. All in all, I believe there is hope for you." "Hope, grandmother?" "Do not address me by that title. I find it depressing, as you yourself will no doubt find it one day. Upon that fateful occasion, remember me if you can, for I shall not be present to witness our mutual discomfort. If grandmother is offensive now, all the more abhorrent must great-grandmother inevitably prove. No, I shall never suffer it. In the meantime, you will address me as Madame. That is acceptable." "Hope of what, Madame?" Elise fought an urge to giggle. "Success, acclaim, power, and fortune. Have you never thought of that, girl? Why indeed have you come to Shireen?" "Because it is fine, exciting, gay, and grand here." "Quite correct. There is no other place. Do you imagine, however, that your tiresome dolt of a father, with his mummified midgets and his pickled gallbladders, do you imagine such a man would finance your presentation at court in pure paternal generosity? It is a costly undertaking, you realize. The clothes, the jewels, the glittering necessities. He has assumed such an expense in order to satisfy your youthful hunger for excitement and novelty?" "Well, certainly he hopes for a good marriage. That goes without saying." Elise shrugged. "You must dispense with that gesture. It is considered gauche." It's natural, and I don't see anything wrong with it." "Nothing wrong with nature? Let me inform you, granddaughter." Zerilyn tapped her ivory stick upon the floor for emphasis. "Nature is a capricious force, whose malevolent manifestations we must oppose with all the force and vigor at our command. Spare me your puling, self-proclaimed philosophers, your Ries-Ras Zemu and his sorry ilk with their maundering celebration for the pastoral fantasy. They weave fables of a world that never was and never could be, a feeble exercise for childish minds. The reality of nature is nasty and brutish, more often than not. Art and will together joined may conquer nature, or at least dress her to advantage. Under my tutelage, granddaughter, you will acquire such art." "You don't think I dress to advantage?" Elise inquired, cutting to the heart of matters. "Certainly not, but you exhibit signs of good instinct. Rest assured, I do not hold you to blame for your failings. Trapped in the wilderness of Quebec throughout your life, deprived of civilization's amenities, how should you know aught of elegance? The wonder is that you have somehow managed to escape the worst taint of provincialism. Truly, saving a few small errors, you are not instantly recognizable as a bumpkin. This unschooled grace stems in the main from your store of inherited abilities, of which I am doubtless the source. In the time yet remaining before your scheduled presentation at court, we shall develop those abilities, camouflage your faults, and emphasize your advantages, polish and refine you until you are fit to compete." "Compete, madame? Do you not hope for a brilliant marriage or liaison? Do you not long for wealth, ease, eminence, independence? All the inestimable benefits attendant upon such a match?" "Surely, but—" "The eldest scions of the noblest exalted houses are few," Zerilyn pointed out. "It is only the eldest, mind you, worthy of consideration, for they stand to inherit. The daughters of the exalted, on the other hand, are numerous, and their ambitions are drearily consistent. Each of them, regardless of age, rank, and beauty, or lack thereof, deems herself fit consort to a future lord, and selects her target accordingly. I've always considered mathematics a distasteful and irrelevant discipline, but occasionally it has its uses. Do you understand me, granddaughter?" "Perfectly, madame. Elise suppressed a snicker. You do not appear greatly concerned. Not greatly. Elise just barely prevented herself from shrugging again. Saving her contact with Drevzino-san, who didn't count, her experience of young men was limited. Nonetheless, she had met sons of the exalted at fairs, at parties, and balls about the district, and under her father's own roof. For the most part, they were a poor lot, weedy, awkward, self-conscious, visibly uneasy as she was uneasy inside. There wasn't one of them with a tenth of Drevzino-san's wit and vitality. Exalted airs, one and all, but completely outclassed by a serf. It really was too absurd. Her observations had strengthened Elise's assurance, with predictable results. The young men had flocked around her at every social gathering the past 2 years or so, and she had little doubt of her own power. Of course, they were provincial young men. Could things be different in Shireen? You must not imagine the young exalted beau of Shireen as a creature similar in many respects to the fabriqué louts of whom you may possess some knowledge, Zerlin advised, as if reading her mind. You will find him a different specimen indeed, relatively sophisticated, discerning, experienced, perhaps even jaded. It is no small matter to engage the attention, much less the affections, of the most eligible. Perhaps it is they who should worry about engaging my attention. Elise tossed her head. Oh, not bad. Zerlin laughed outright, but still without wrinkling the skin around her eyes. Not bad at all. It is often just such cool effrontery that triumphs. It is an attitude you might do well to cultivate once you are fit to carry it off properly. Just now, such a pose could only expose you to ridicule. Ridicule? Elise's chin came up. Do not poke your chin, granddaughter. Zerlin tapped her stick abruptly. And do not shrug at me. I have already prohibited that gesture. I trust your memory is not defective. My memory is excellent, Elise scowled, and I will not be spoken to that way. I am 17 years old, no longer a child, and I will not be treated like one by you. As for the rest, I will poke and shrug to my heart's content. Ah, that willful temper marks you as my granddaughter indeed, and as such you will certainly please yourself. If you must play the ruffled country mouse and come to court, I'll not interfere. Unsettled by her grandmother's air of acid amusement, her vanity threatened, Elise hesitated, chewing her lip, and then inquired grudgingly, Very well, madame. What are these glaring defects of mine to which you insist on calling attention? They call attention to themselves, granddaughter. My effort in that respect is redundant. I would not, however, deny your urgent curiosity, and therefore I will tell you. The freedom of your movements, your gestures, your naive manipulation of the fan, the style of your hair, your lack of paint, your turn of phrase, although, thank fortune, the accent of Quebec does not pollute your tongue, the transparency of your emotions, all these things reveal your ignorance of the Shirinian style. Then it would seem I am a hopeless case, in your opinion at least. You angle for praise. Well, then, you may have it, such as it is. You possess certain natural advantages. You are by no means ungraceful. Your figure is well proportioned, if a trifle meager. Your arms, hands, neck, and feet are more than adequate. You are well favored. Your lips are not so tiny as the mode demands, and a slight upward tilt bars your nose from perfection. Your eyes and complexion, however, could not be improved upon. Your hair is luxuriant, of good length and sheen, but an unfortunate color. Blondes are passé, I'm told. This year the court sighs over the raven locks of Madame Vercluse. Perhaps we shall alter your color. No! Be that as it may. In short, you offer up a fine collection of raw materials, much in need of refining prior to public display. This refining I myself will perform. Why, madame? Elise was torn between appreciation and annoyance. She was not yet fully convinced that she required improvement. Why should you trouble yourself? As I molded myself so many years ago, so now I will undertake the task once more with you. Upon the day that you secure the most desirable masculine prize at court, thus ensuring your own greatness, I shall know that I have repeated my early triumph. This will afford me both satisfaction and diversion, by which you would do well to profit. Now, granddaughter, do you accept my assistance, and will you be absolutely ruled by me? It is a considerable offer, you realize, which you would be mad to refuse. Well, Elise hesitated. Speak up, girl. I accept your offer, with thanks, madame, but I don't promise to be absolutely ruled by anyone. It came out before she had known what she was going to say. Impertinent little hussy. You are my granddaughter beyond question. I see it more clearly with every passing moment. We shall make do, no doubt. We shall begin by examining your wardrobe, little of which is apt to prove salvageable. Oh, you're wrong, madame, Elise assured her. The gowns I've brought with me are new, most of them made for this trip. New and equally impossible, no doubt. Your costume, while fetching, shrieks rusticity. We do not wish you mistaken for a runaway shepherdess. Mistress Zolier was the best seamstress in Gramantes. Gramantes, pish, opined Zerilyn, with a contemptuous flourish of the stick. Heed me, granddaughter. My judgment in these matters is irreproachable. Almost without volition, Elise's eyes traveled over the bows and flounces of her grandmother's antiquated gown. Noting the look, Zerilyn smiled dryly. Do not be deceived by the obsolescence of my own attire. Do not imagine it is chosen in ignorance, sentiment, or senility. I am perfectly versed in the current mode, yet affect the costume of my youth because it suits me, it pleases me, and sets me at my ease. Owing to my age and eminence, I am revered as a stately eccentric. It is one of the very few advantages of age. The same toleration, however, would scarcely be extended to you, were you to appear at court garbed as you are now. You shall have new gowns, I will bear the expense, and there is an end to the matter. Madame, your generosity is prompted by self-interest alone. Do not imagine otherwise. This project arouses my interest, and I am willing to finance my diversions. As for your bucolic fripperies, throw them away, or, better yet, give them to your woman. Give all these new clothes to Kerth? She's a Daravel serf. I glimpsed her below as your Berlin arrived. She resembles a milkmaid. She was one. We shall endeavor to conceal her base origins. Your woman must walk spruce and trim, granddaughter, else she does you little credit. Soon you will perceive. But look, here's an example before our eyes. Zerilyn rose from her chair to stand very erect. She was at least an inch shorter than her granddaughter, but somehow managed to create the illusion of superior height. Back poker straight, she made her way to the nearest window. She moved without a trace of a limp. The ivory stick was purely decorative in function. Elise followed. There, Zerilyn pointed. There, across the street, is Madame Vaubelisandre, come to call upon her aunt. Behind the Belisandre walks her woman. Do you see, granddaughter? Elise followed the pointing finger to behold a tall, broad-shouldered, strikingly handsome brunette, attired in summer's white lawn descending from a chaise. The tending maid was sleek, plump, and self-satisfied in a sashed periwinkle gown of obvious quality. There, granddaughter, that is the way your woman should look. As for the other, that is the way you should look. Do you note the fluid simplicity of her attire? Her modiste relied entirely upon the cut of the fabric to achieve that effect. Little ornamentation was required. I see. Yes, I see that. Elise pressed her nose to the glass. Suddenly her own ruffled afternoon gown seemed clumsy, juvenile, embarrassing. She could feel the telltale heat in her cheeks, and to disguise her discomfort, inquired inconsequentially, She is very pretty, isn't she, the dark lady? Perhaps, if you admire the Amazonian type. Myself, I perceive a certain lack of delicacy there. Fortunately for the Belisandre, Ferrand does not share my opinion. Ferrand? Elise's eyes opened wide. The Duke of Ferrand was King Danlas's younger brother. Madame Vaux Belisandre is his Grace's current mistress. His mistress? Elise gazed in fascination after the Duke's favorite, now vanishing through the door of her aunt's townhouse. Mistress to royalty was an honorable and enviable position, yet still carried an aura of faintly scandalous glamour. Oh, she must be extraordinary. As a matter of fact, she is decidedly dull. Her beauty is almost masculine in style. Her conversation is insipid, her mind second-rate, and it is said that she managed to attract the Duke solely by reason of her ability to recite pornographic doggerel while performing acrobatics. I own this to an impressive accomplishment, yet not in itself sufficient, I think, to hold Ferrante indefinitely. Greater variety is required for more lasting success. No, the Belisandre's days are numbered, and the Duke will soon seek a replacement, a newcomer at court, provided she is clever, daring, and well-sponsored, might at so critical a juncture exploit her advantage of novelty to the fullest. Elise swiveled sharply to face her grandmother. Madame, do you suggest that I suggest that you examine all possibilities with care. I've never even considered. Consider now. But come, be at ease, granddaughter. No one is demanding so momentous a decision of you at this instant. Zarelyn permitted herself another unwrinkled smile. As of now, the possibility I have touched upon does not yet exist for you, and will not until we have achieved the requisite polish. We shall commence tomorrow, at which time you shall visit Mistress Nemaise, one of the few contemporary modistes truly comprehending her own profession. You will be measured and fitted for new gowns. Sketches will be rendered, fabric samples chosen, and delivered to a milliner of ability. Mistress Zellure would be best for you, I think. Time permitting, we shall also carry you to the shops of the new arcade, where suitable fans, gloves, ribbons, laces, and sundries may be selected. Upon our return, your lessons in deportment will commence. It will be a full and strenuous day, but not, I believe, unduly burdensome. Until then, you are free to amuse yourself as you see fit. Good day, granddaughter. I will see you tomorrow morning. The next day, Elise woke early in the unfamiliar bedroom. Cartha was already up and at work. A goblet of fruit juice and a plate of sweet rolls waited on the stand beside the bed. Elise ate quickly, rose, and with her maid's assistance donned a new white muslin gown whose violet lace ruffles now seemed painfully provincial. Her hair was caught up in a careless, almost disheveled knot, a style that Cartha had already spotted upon several soignée Chirinian heads, and which she was able to duplicate with surprising facility. The girls descended to find Madame Vaux Rouvenyac in the foyer. Cartha eyed Zarelyn with awe. It was the first time she had met her mistress's grandmother face to face, and all at once she went clumsy and fidgety. Zarelyn bestowed a glance of pity upon the red-faced maid. Charitably, she refrained from comment. Together, the three of them exited the townhouse. Outside awaited the Rouvenyac landau, cloud gray with silver trim and surprising flame-colored reins, the coachman liveried in black and silver. A black and silver footman assisted their entrance, whereupon they discovered the carriage already occupied. A young girl of about 14 sat waiting for them. She was chubby and lacy as a lavender sachet, with a poreless pink skin, quick little brown eyes, turned-up nose and rounded chin, a varnished crown of ash-brown curls, fingernails lacquered in 2 colors, and a precocious plump bosom too exposed by an unsuitably décolleté summer dress. One of the crowd of youthful kinsmen gathered about the dinner table the previous evening, one of the Vaux Rouvenyac cousins. The face was familiar, but Elise could not remember the name. "Good morning, great-aunt. I am quite ready to go," the girl announced. Without awaiting reply, she turned to Elise. "Good morning, cousin. Is this young person with you your woman? What is her name? She is very rusticated, but not repellently so. If you would give her a new gown and command her to dress her hair anew, I think it not unlikely she will catch the eye of great-aunt's new footman, who is a very pretty youth, let me assure you. The undercook is equally pretty, but something coarse to my mind. Being rusticated, however, perhaps your woman's tastes are not over nice. Me, I do not yet have my own woman, for they tell me quite untruly that I am too young. My birthday is but 2 months away, however, and time flies. I am much abused, to my mind. Perhaps, cousin, I might borrow your woman to wait on me when I walk abroad?" Kirith's eyes grew rounder. Before Elise could reply, Zerilyn spoke. "Child Aurelie, you are here uninvited, and your presence is superfluous. How did you discover our plans? Were the servants loose-tongued, or did you listen at the keyhole?" "But, Granty," the girl protested, "I have instructed you not to address me by that revolting title." "But you are surely my great-aunt, and it seems to me—" "Child Aurelie, you are forward, shrewd, and presumptuous. Leave the carriage. You will return to your chamber." "But, madame, do you not visit the modiste and the milliner? I wish to inspect these people. Perhaps they will serve my own purposes when I am presented at court months hence." "Years hence, child Aurelie." "Pah, I am fit now. Will you wait until my bloom is past?" "In intellect you have yet scarcely budded." "And today I must visit the new arcade for antique gold lacing and rosettes of the color True Love's Lament." "Enough." Zerilyn turned to Elise. "We will overlook the unwitting outrages of this half-savage infant whose offenses are rooted in simple ignorance. Forgive her if you can." Her voice sharpened, but still she did not frown. Her forehead remained almost unlined. "Child Aurelie, leave us." "But, madame, that's not fair. That's not—" "Let her come with us," Elise suggested. "I'd enjoy the company, and where's the harm?" Zerilyn wavered, ivory stick poised indecisively. "Please, madame, please." Aurelie's expression was piteous. Zerilyn struck her stick sharply against the roof. The coachman plied his whip, and the carriage began to move. Aurelie settled back in her seat with a sigh of satisfaction. Down the tree-lined street the landau creaked, past rows of immaculate cream townhouses, gardens and fountains, and at last, beneath the marble archway marking the boundary of the exalted section known as the Parabeau, wherein Zerilyn von Rouvenjak resided. Beyond the Parabeau, the way grew less elegant but more interesting. They passed through a prosperous bourgeois neighborhood, where the newly rich merchants bedizened their dwellings with frilled and gilded cupolas, silvered wrought-iron lacework, and hideous painted statuary. Farther on, beyond a green park, the streets narrowed, the buildings were old and tumble-down, the pedestrians threadbare and gray-faced. Hooting urchins flung clods and insults at the passing landau, despite the coachman's nimble whip. Vagrants huddled in the doorways, and the reek of unwashed humanity weighted the air. And then they were out on the old boulevard Crown Prince, rumbling by the Havelock Gardens, site of numberless duels, been on through Bohemian Rat Town, with its famous wine shops, coffee houses, cafes, and beggar musicians. Beyond Rat Town crouched the wretched slums of the 8th District, which impinged upon the ancient prison known as the Sepulchre, wherein victims of royal or exalted wrath were interred along with the worst of criminals. Elise regarded the Sepulchre with morbid curiosity. The place was a historic hellhole, famed for its antiquity and its celebrated inmates, notorious for its damp, stinking cells, lethal air, and periodic epidemics. Worse even then, Worse even than the known reality were the rumors of torture and atrocity inflicted upon political prisoners. It was widely believed the suspected enemies of the Von Irish monarch were subjected to the grisliest of magical torments. That these rumors were unverifiable neither diminished their fascination nor prevented their general acceptance. And as the years passed, the old prison's reputation waxed in sinister luster. Initially constructed as a medieval fortress guarding a narrow bend in the River Vire, the sepulchre was square in outline, with a high castellated tower at each corner, massive inner and outer walls, a ponderous keep with skinny, grudging windows, the whole conveying a sense of infinite solidity, overwhelming weight and mass. Later on, when the fortress had become a prison and additional space was required, a warren of subterranean corridors and dungeons had been excavated. And it was there, below ground, in those infamous torture chambers, that the legend of the sepulchre was born in blood. Past the sepulchre sped the landau, on across the old bridge vinculum that spanned the Vire, through the jungle-vital waterfront market, beneath the projecting gables of ancient timbered structures housing jewelers, goldsmiths, moneylenders, then on through the dignified circle of the Grand Monarch and into Requinart Street, where the greatest modistes invented and decreed the fashion. Throughout the journey, Aurélie never stopped talking. Her discourse centered chiefly upon her own desire to serve as a maid of honor. The maids, it seemed, enjoying high visibility and popularity, were perfectly situated to attract the attention of the great beaux of the court. Moreover, the favored girls flaunted the most glorious gowns, displayed to great advantage when they were carried in dashing little open phaetons around the girdle of Havelock Gardens. Surely there could be no better life. And Elise, who had actually won the coveted position, was doubtless the luckiest of women. "Your good fortune is remarkable, cousin," Aurélie remarked. "For the honor is prodigious, the rivalry to secure it is keen, and it must not be forgotten that provincial exalted, Fabrique, Varet, Girondy, and the like, are held in little esteem. Mind you, I am guilty of no such injustice. I do not regard our country kinsmen as oafs, boors, boobies, and blundering boors, at least not all of them. I do not doubt there are exceptions, and let me make it quite clear, cousin, I perceive much hope for you. With your great eyes and such lashes, I cannot doubt the impact of your charms. Indeed, that fragile look is never truly out of style, and no doubt that you will find your admirers, among whom you must choose wisely. I am informed that the handsomest gallant of court is the Count Rouvenil Nizoir Lillevant, who composes poetry and is exceedingly well made. The famous duelist, the Cavalier Vaufrenoux, is likewise a pretty fellow, said to be of an amorous disposition, conqueror of countless women. "Child Aurélie, you will cease this inane prattle," commanded Zerlin, much to Elise's frustration. "But, Granty—" "You will cease," Zerlin insisted, "for I will not have you parading your own folly. In any event, we have arrived." The carriage halted before a spotless stone shop front whose tiny brass plaque announced the establishment of Mistress Nemé. The passengers alighted and entered the shop to find themselves in a foyer resembling the salon of a well-appointed townhouse. The furnishings were quietly opulent, the atmosphere formal. By no sign other than the bell over the door that rang at their entrance was the commercial nature of the establishment apparent. A gray-clad shopgirl appeared to greet them, to seat the three ladies, to fetch them biscuits and ratafia. Cartha remained standing behind Elise's chair. When Elise passed the maid a handful of biscuits, Zerlin's brows rose, while Aurélie's eyes rounded. Presently, Mistress Nemé herself appeared. The modiste was a slight, desiccated woman of indeterminate age. She wore a plain black gown with a white collar,
a white cap with lappets completely concealing her hair, and no jewelry. She greeted her exalted customers courteously, but without deference, almost as if she imagined herself their equal. Mistress Nemea was known as the Queen's favorite dressmaker. In light of royal patronage, the woman had acquired unbecoming delusions of grandeur, which were generally tolerated for the sake of her genuine talent. Her fees were exorbitant and her manner too consequential, but her creations were worth any price and her services desperately in demand. Presumably, it was Zerilyn Vaurouvignac famous name that had purchased so prompt an audience. Now Mistress Nemea led them from the foyer back into the huge workroom, where 24 little seamstresses labored in dedicated silence. Wood and plaster mannequins, lifelike down to the last anatomical detail, stood scattered disconcertingly about the room. The walls were lined with shelves bearing bolts of the most dazzling fabrics Elise had ever seen. Row upon row of glowing silks, radiant brocades shot with gold and silver, velvets deep enough to sink into, gauze transparent as a sigh, black lace spangled with jet and crystal, iridescent embroideries representing the labor of several lifetimes. The floor and tables were littered with pasteboard cartons, some of them open. Elise glimpsed silk flowers, rosettes, and cockades, laces, scallop-edged ribbons, jeweled buckles and buttons, fringes and silken tassels, feathers and curly plumes in every color. It was nothing like Mistress Zolier's shop in Gramantes. But there was little time to admire, for the seamstresses with their chalk and tape measures were closing in on her like sharks. They led her into a curtained, mirrored alcove, where they swiftly divested her of gown and chemise, took an embarrassingly complete set of measurements, and then proceeded to cut, pin, and fit a muslin pattern to her body. It seemed to take forever. In reality, they finished the job within minutes, and then they dressed her, and she emerged from the alcove to find Zerilyn and Mistress Nemea deep in conversation. The modiste held a sketchpad in charcoal. Elise drew near. The older woman took no heed. "Ivory for the presentation gown," decreed Mistress Nemea, in the shade Dawn Murmuring. A touch, but a touch only, of gold embroidery about the hem and train. No color at all. No other color at all, for an effect unusually simple and striking. Narrow, very soft, slim lines, subtly hinting at indiscretion. Thus. Her charcoal flew over the paper, and a figure took shape. Elise stared, while Aurelie and Kirthe drew near to peep over her shoulder. She has the height and presence to carry this look. Lowered neckline, no jewelry, hair drawn back to cascade in curls, minimal headdress without jewels, ivory plumes, full but not long. Thus, all parts of the ensemble conspire to guide the eye whither we will, to what we most desire to display. In this particular case, to the face. "It is a pretty enough gown, but monstrous plain, is it not?" inquired Aurelie. "Would not some ribbons and a double row of knitted poufs about the hem improve it? The color Innocence Betrayed is all the rage, and would no doubt suit my cousin. A necklace with matching earrings would be very genteel as well. To my mind," the same doubts had troubled Elise, but here in this temple of fashion she would scarcely have dared question the high priestess. Now she was glad she had held her tongue, for Zerilyn and Mistress Nemea turned identically freezing, astonished eyes upon the young girl. "Child Aurelie, you embarrass yourself," observed Zerilyn. "Mistress Nemea composes her ensembles with an artist's eye. If you are unable to appreciate her subtlety and skill, that is your misfortune, which you need hardly advertise by word of mouth." "La Grunty, I protest, I meant no ill. I swear it is very pretty dress. When I am fitted for my own presentation gown, however, I trust Mistress Nemea will express my personality in terms of more vivid color, glittering jewels, and dramatic allure." "Enough!"
Zerlin's stick rapped the floor. Foolish child, you are fit only for the nursery. The nursery? The nursery. Oh. Arlie lapsed into outraged silence. Zerlin and Mistress Neme resumed their interrupted conference, heads bent over sketches and fabric samples. Elise hovered nearby, interested but superfluous, as the designs for morning, afternoon, dinner, and dancing gowns evolved. Her opinion was not sought, and intimidated by the atmosphere of the place, she did not offer it. In any event, there seemed little need. There was something almost magical in the vision and instincts of Mistress Nemai. Relatively untutored though she was, Elise could sense genius at work, to her benefit. Passive as one of Nemai's plaster mannequins, she allowed the process to continue uninterrupted. They finished at last. A pile of sketches lay before Mistress Nemai in a spread of swatches in richly melting shades of ivory, peach, rose, smoked amethyst, and raspberry. A schedule of fittings was arranged, a viewing, and a final adjustment session. Countess Rouvenjak and Mistress Nemai inclined their respective heads in a manner suggestive of mutual understanding and respect, even something akin to regard. Swatches were collected and trimmings cut, labeled, and bundled for the benefit of the appointed milliner, whereupon Mistress Nemai surprised them. Caught up in the enterprise and creative impulses fired by youth, prospects, and prettiness of her client, the modiste declared herself unwilling to relinquish artistic control. No alien hand would design. It was surely an honor. Beyond that, it saved hours or days' worth of time. This last counted heavily, for Elise was tired and curiously annoyed. She had already discovered that ordering and fitting, two primary occupations of the fashionable woman, palled quickly. As a young, unmarried girl, of course, she lacked authority. She was being treated almost as a child, or even a puppet, her own tastes disregarded by all, and it was galling beyond words. Almost she was tempted to rebel, but self-interest dictated compliance. She had no legitimate cause for complaint. Quite the contrary, in fact. Her new wardrobe would be superb. Wisely, she nodded and smiled in silence. More sketches, more trimmings, this time with silk flowers, plumes, and misty pastel clouds of tulle veiling so fanciful and extravagant that Elise forgot all else for a while, and only the sound of Kjert's stomach rumbling in hunger alerted her to the passage of time. It was well into the afternoon when they left Mistress Nemai's shop. Zerlin suggested lunch at a cafe of good reputation. Another novel experience, for Elise had never visited a cafe, and the landau clattered down Requenoir Street in the direction of the new arcade. The huge arcade, housing a collection of shops on 2 levels beneath a great glass-paneled roof, was one of the most popular exalted haunts of Shireen, where ladies of quality congregated to inspect and purchase exquisite inessentials, to gossip while sipping cordials in little chocolate houses, to parade their newest fashions, to see and be seen. True, the place was a magnet for tourists, and the shops were always crowded with all manner of provincial simpletons. That did not diminish their appeal, however, and Elise was curious as any other newcomer. She was pleasantly a-tingle with anticipation as the carriage neared the bottom of Requenoir Street. Between Requenoir Street and the new arcade stood the King's Theatre, in the midst of a tangle of lanes crammed with coffee houses, wine shops, taverns, and cook shops. Here it was that beggars voracious as rats assembled to importune the well-heeled patrons of the theatre. Here the political-minded often gathered to dissect the latest disasters. And here today, for some reason, the traffic had stopped. The coaches stood motionless in the street, their path blocked by hordes of agitated pedestrians. The landau halted. There was no way forward and no room to turn. Zerlin's ivory stick banged the roof in vain. Elise stuck her head out one window. Arlie and Kjerth took the other, while Zerlin remained motionless, neck and back set in a rigid straight line, staring icily straight before her. The landau was trapped in Brakeleg Lane, only a few dozen yards from the theater. A number of gigs and carriages stood like islands in the midst of a restless human sea. Hundreds of citizens, most of them shabby, milled in the street. Elise looked around her, interested but a little impatient, for she wanted her lunch. Many of the pedestrians were clutching the yellowish paper sheets of a broadside or cheap newspaper, something of the sort. In view of its size, the crowd was surprisingly silent. The customary Sharanian babble was almost entirely stilled. Then Elise became aware of a lone speaker's voice, not far away, and she followed the eyes of the crowd to the green bronze statue of legendary Violmente, the greatest of actors, caught and frozen forever in the throes of declamation. Violmente gestured atop a great granite pedestal. Right up there beside him declaimed a threadbare youth in the loose pantaloons, open-necked shirt, and soft cap of the university student. The youth held one of the dingy paper sheets, whose printed content he was reading aloud to the largely illiterate audience. It took a few moments of listening before the sense of the matter began to impress itself upon Elise's unprepared mind. When she understood, her breath caught. It was an attack upon the Queen Lalizé. Couched in the ugliest of terms, the essay accused the foreign-born queen of whoredom, venality, and diverse crimes against the people of Vonar. Despite all brutality, or perhaps because of it, the language possessed a powerful raw vigor that riveted the listener's attention. Elise herself was fascinated and repelled. She did not for one moment believe that Queen Lalizé had lain with every officer of the king's guard, nor did she credit the existence of an infamous purple closet housing a collection of whips, goads, ticklers, chains, and manacles of solid gold encrusted with diamonds and emeralds. She did not believe Lalizé guilty of incest, nor yet of bestiality, and if such a lover as the queen's stallion actually existed, it was doubtful that the sobriquet demanded literal interpretation. She did not believe that the queen participated in orgies, dallied abed in the afternoons with her friend of young Princess Varian, or delighted in corrupting the morals of pubescent boys. Elise believed none of these things, but could not forbear listening. Kirth and Arlie were similarly mesmerized. Kirth's mouth was hanging open, and Arlie was literally leaning out the window, straining to catch every word. Only Zerlin sat inflexibly upright, motionless and apparently deaf. Atop the pedestal, the student read on, and now a mutter of bitter resentment began to stir the crowd. Indignation intensified as the speaker launched into a denunciation of the queen's criminal extravagance, larding his diatribe with fanciful descriptions of the royal jewels, furs, and gowns purchased at the price of the commoner's tears and blood. The matter was less colorful than that of Lalizé's alleged concupiscence, but more directly related to the actual grievances of the peasantry, and it drew an immediate response. Shouts of indignation interrupted the student's discourse. Who is that foul-mouthed lunatic? Elise wondered aloud. Why is he permitted to spew such filth in public? No one heeded her. The student read on. Now he spoke of the king, limning the introverted Dunlus the 13th as a maundering, weak-willed non-entity dominated by his grasping harlot wife, a dunce, an ass, an acquiescent cuckold, a shifty, shuffling, lying fool straight out of the old comic plays. It was a childishly simple-minded attack,
instantly comprehensible and thus appealing to the city mob. Shouts of heartfelt execration arose, and Elise's nostrils flared fastidiously. "Phew! They stink and they bay like dogs," she observed with a disdain calculated to conceal her own uneasiness. Formerly, she had imagined hostility to Crown and Exalted confined to a small group of malcontents and fanatics. But the present reaction of the Sharanian crowd suggested otherwise, and the implications were disagreeable. The reader neared the end of the essay, and the tempo of the prose picked up. Whoever composed it knew how to build to a crudely powerful finale. The sentences grew shorter, simpler, stronger. The individual words were sharp and harsh in sound, most of them monosyllabic, spitting from the speaker's mouth with the force of a fusillade. In tune with the spirit of his material, the student quickened the pace of his reading. His chest heaved, he brandished a clenched fist, and his voice rose in genuine fury as he spewed forth a final spate of accusations, concluding with a demand for the arrest and trial of King Daedalus and Queen Lalazé for vile crimes against the Vanarge people. A pregnant pause followed, broken at last by a single, reckless hurrah that broke the spell of silence. The crowd exploded into delirious cheers. "That is treason!" Elise was astounded. "That is absolute treason! He should be arrested. Why doesn't someone silence him?" Her voice drowned in the roar of the crowd. There was no point in trying to talk. Elbows propped on the window frame, she rested her chin upon her hand and watched. Outside milled and shouted the heated Sharanians. Copies of the printed sheets were flying from hand to hand. The seditious student still occupied the immense pedestal. Now a number of the more athletic citizens clambered up to pump the young man's hand, to clap his shoulder and thump his back. Elise shook her head, amazed and disgusted. Her attitude did not go unnoticed. A leering, beard-straggled face bobbed up at the carriage window. A fist clutching a crumpled paper thrust forward. Elise flinched away from it. The paper dropped into her lap. Face and fist disappeared. Elise froze, aghast at the alien intrusion. Slowly her eyes dropped to the paper in her lap. After a moment, she poked at it with the tip of her fingernail, half fearing contamination or explosion. Nothing happened, and gingerly she unfolded the rough-fibered sheet to expose a cheaply printed newspaper entitled "Neighbor Jumal's Complaint." Her eyes hurried down the page. The lead article, called "Whore's Plunder," she had just heard read aloud. Other essays, shorter but equally pungent, denounced the iniquity of Daedalus' reign. All were forceful, shrewd and profane, transparently inflammatory, obvious and effective. All were clearly the product of one hand, one mind. The writer had created a carping, combative, coarsely jocular peasant persona known as Neighbor Jumal. Most likely that neighbor was the rag's sole editor, a person calling himself Huis Velier, whose name appeared at the top of the first page and the bottom of the last. Elise's lip curled as she took in the pseudo-exalted form of the name, Valier. No member of her own class could ever have stooped to such infamy. The presumption of the sewer-minded journalist was outrageous. She would have liked to have seen him jailed for his gall no less than for his treasonous libel. The lowest dungeon of the sepulchre was none too good. Elise felt a pressure upon her back and turned her head. Arlie was reading Neighbor Jumal's complaint over her shoulder. "Filthy, odious, insufferable," opined Arlie. Do you speak of the essayist or the reader? Are they one and the same? Did that skinny fellow compose the thing? Is he Wisvillier? No, it cannot be. He is too young, too soulful, too pretty. His hair is wavy, his complexion lively, his form well knit and athletic. He is somewhat buck-toothed, but by no means ill-favored. All things considered, it is clear his aims are noble. Well, it's not so clear to me, returned the least. No one should be allowed to fling such muck about in public. We shouldn't have to hear it. I think he ought to be locked up. You display uncommon good sense, granddaughter, observed Zerlin. The noise outside was subsiding, and her remarks were effortlessly audible. She did not deign to glance out the window. These people block the thoroughfares, impeding our progress, offending our eyes with their ugliness, our nostrils with their stench, and above all, our ears with their obscenity. Their verbal effluvia dirties the city air and is not to be borne. Where is the law to protect us? As if to answer her query, a half-dozen of the city's gendarmerie rounded the corner of the King's Theatre to advance upon Vehement's statue. Straight through the crowd the gendarmes cut, and those citizens slow in yielding passage were roughly shouldered or thrust aside. The youth on the pedestal saw them coming. Without an instant's hesitation, he turned and sprang from his perch straight out into the thick of the mob. Dozens of hands were raised to break his fall. He was set down gently upon his feet. A path opened magically before him, and the young man broke into a run, reaching the edge of the crowd within seconds. Pursued by the cheers of his admirers, he disappeared down a neighboring alleyway, and the path closed behind him. In vain the gendarmes thrust forward. Arms interlocked, a host of jeering, hooting savages opposed their progress. The commanding officer snapped an order. Reversing their weapons, the gendarmes plied their musket butts freely, and the citizens fell back. Jeers and hoots gave way to screams of pain and rage. As the laborious advance resumed, somebody hurled a rock. The missile arced from the heart of the crowd to strike a gendarme squarely between the shoulder blades. A grunt of pain escaped the victim, and the mob howled. A barrage of rocks followed, and one of the soldiers fell, blood streaming down his face. The gendarmes raised and leveled their muskets. A single warning shot sped over the heads of the citizens, who seemed not to hear it. Rocks rained down on the soldiers, who responded with a salvo of musket fire. 5 shots rang out as one, and 5 Shirenians went down, 2 of them dead upon the spot. For an instant there was a red stillness, and the groans of the wounded were clearly audible. At once the gendarmes set about reloading, and the crowd snarled like a malignant, 1,000-headed beast. The commanding officer of the gendarmes was blessed with presence of mind. Voice reverberating through Breakleg Lane, the officer exclaimed, "Crowd queller! The queller comes!" Mystified, Elise shot a questioning glance at her cousin. "A secret royal appointment," Aurelie explained in an excited whisper. "His Majesty's queller of Shireen is an exalted dignitary whose magic subdues unruly crowds." "What does he do to them?" "No one knows, for his full powers are never actually called upon, but his methods are said to be dreadful. Perhaps we shall see for ourselves." The prospect did not appear unwelcome to Aurelie. The threat of the queller was extraordinarily effective. The mounting electric charge of violence faded from the air like aborted lightning. A nervous gabbling arose, and the crowd churned in angry confusion. During the lull, the gendarmes completed reloading, raised and leveled their muskets. "Return to your homes," the officer commanded with apparent assurance. "In the king's name." Muttering from the crowd, a few uncertain boos, a couple of defiant oaths. A number of citizens began to melt away down the alleys. "Retire now, or we open fire." A trickle of retreating citizens increased to a flow,
but the greater part of the crowd lingered undecided. Then came a pounding of hoofbeats, and an armed party of masked horsemen swept into Breakleg Lane. At their front rode a man whose black-robed figure was concealed beneath a voluminous black cloak bearing the royal insignia of Vonar. A peaked black hood with slits cut to the eyes covered his entire head, and his hands were hidden by taloned gauntlets straight out of some medieval artist's best nightmare. Through the crowd the horsemen cut to the base of the immense statue, and there drew rein. The effect of this sinister apparition was immediate. Cries of consternation arose, and those citizens nearest the statue shrank back, many taking flight. The masked horsemen, apparently oblivious, sat like faceless idols. In preternatural silence, the black-clad queller surveyed the scene, featureless gaze slowly sweeping left and right. Unable to sustain that uncanny stare, a crew of citizens fled. Those remaining appeared sullenly irresolute. From beneath his great cloak, the queller produced a long and narrow device, about the length and breadth of a musket. Unlike a musket, however, this mechanism was silvery and shining, bright with glass lenses, burnished wire convolutions, luminous metallic whorls. "What is that thing?" inquired Elise, amazed. Somehow the contraption, in its outlandish complexity, reminded her of the exalted crafted stupefaction at the city gate. Aureli's shrug disclaimed knowledge. The queller snapped a lever, pulled a bolt, fingered a whorl, and the lens at the end of the device glowed with poison-colored light. Thin shrieks of alarm greeted the sight, and the crowd swiftly dwindled. A sizable band of citizens remained, however, and it was to these stubborn malcontents that one of the queller's minions addressed himself in ringing metallic tones, for the queller himself was inscrutably mute. "Rioters and ruffians, in the king's name you are commanded to disperse. Leave this place, else exalted magic blasts you where you stand. His Majesty's queller of Shireen now readies a magical device whose light induces blindness, deafness, and paralysis of all limbs. Those touched by its rays are ruined and worse than dead. Dogs, you deserve no better, and yet your king in his charity offers mercy. Return to your homes and no harm befalls you. Disobey and you are lost. Now go." Many believed him. Citizens streamed from Breakleg Lane. As they went, they vented their frustration by striking and kicking the carriages trapped in the street, and the Rouvenyac landau shook beneath the assault. The entire frame vibrated, and Elise, rattled like a die in a box, clutched at the window frame and hung on grimly. Her distress deepened as clods, pebbles, and sticks flung by passing peasants came pelting in through the open window. The threat of the coachman's flying whip was not enough to prevent a lantern-jawed slattern from leaning in just long enough to spit into Aureli's face. A cry of fear and disgust was wrung from the young girl, who shrank back into the corner, rubbing her cheek as if the saliva burned. Eyes wide, Cartha slid from the seat to crouch in a ball upon the shaking floor. Only Zerlin appeared unaffected as she sat erect and rock-steady, chin up and face expressionless, gazing straight before her as if unconscious of plebeian impertinence. Not all were cowed by the queller's menace. A short distance from the Rouvenyac landau, a broad-shouldered, long-limbed man, clad in a laborer's smock and bandana, was trying to stem the crowd's retreat. Both arms uplifted, the man cried out that the queller's magical device was a sham, a fake, a useless, exalted toy. The people must stand their ground. The people held the true power, and now was the time to prove it. Whether this plea might have swayed the crowd was never to be proved. Before the laborer had finished speaking, one of the horsemen drew a pistol, took leisurely aim, and fired. The target fell dead. Completing his adjustments, the queller hoisted his luminous device to his shoulder level and sighted along the barrel. The citizens' retreat became a stampede.
In screaming panic, they fled the site. Within moments, Breakleg Lane was all but empty. A handful of carriages remained, and a scattering of blood-stained bodies. The Queller and his cohorts did not linger. Turning their horses, they trotted off, leaving the surviving city gendarmes to deal with the wounded and the dead. Elise surveyed the scene in white-lipped disbelief. Her shining shireen had not delayed in displaying its darker aspect. Beside her, Aurelie sat pop-eyed, both plump little hands pressed to her face. Kerith huddled miserable and trembling on the floor. Only Zeralen's steel-spined composure remained perfectly intact. "Grandmother, Madame." "One moment." Zeralen's stick banged the roof. An instant later, the landau began to move. The way was clear. Environment statues soon receded into the distance. "There, that is over, and a disgraceful inconvenience it has proved, delaying our progress and costing so heavily in time that I fear we must forgo luncheon if we are to visit the shops of the new arcade." "Madame, surely we aren't going on to the shops today," Elise exclaimed. Zeralen's brows rose. "Such was our original intent. I perceive no reason to alter it." "But we've just seen people fighting and dying in the streets. After that, how can you think of buying ribbons?" "The rioting and the ribbons are entirely unrelated matters. The sight of the one has no bearing upon desire for the other. Your logic appears faulty, and your memory equally flawed." "My memory?" "Yes, for you forget who you are. Granddaughter, you are Vaux d'Araval of the exalted class. As such, your actions are in no wise influenced by the complaints of the canal. Such boorish incivilities are altogether beneath your notice, and you demonstrate your quality in ignoring them." "Be that as it may, I'm in no humor for shopping today." Elise's chin set. "You are easily turned from your purpose. You must display stronger character, an undaunted spirit, and a more vigorous resolution if you are to thrive in the court." "And you a greater sensibility if you were to thrive out of it," Elise dared. "Ah, insolent creature, you are my granddaughter beyond question." Zeralen turned to her other charge. "And you, child Aurelie, do you not wish to visit the new arcade?" Aurelie shook her head vehemently, eyes downcast. A muffled sob escaped Kerith. Lacking a handkerchief, she wiped her eyes on her sleeve. "I am disappointed." Zeralen eyed the drooping girls severely. "Most disappointed. Very well, you will have your way. We shall return home, where Elise's lessons in deportment commence. With matters of such import to occupy your mind, granddaughter, I trust you will squander no additional attention upon the inconsequential insolence of a mindless, unwashed rabble."
Thank you for listening to Orion's Bedtime Stories podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it and that you have a lovely, relaxing evening. Thank you and sweet dreams.